All right. Good morning, everyone. I am Donna DeMarco. I am the Executive Director of Building Congress and Exchange. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you taking out an hour of your time to have this conversation with us. But before we get started, I do want to give a quick shout out to our partners. These are the folks that really help us financially. They give a little extra financial support for us, and without them, we can't put on programs like this. Some of you, I think, that are on today are definitely part of these member companies that we have that are partners. So thank you. Again, we really do appreciate all of the support. We have more than 40 partners, which is really our highest that we've had since we started this program about 10 years ago. So we are really excited about all of the support that we get. Before we get started, I do want to just bring up two pretty quick things. We want to talk about craftsmanship. This is our signature program. We really honor the extraordinary work that the craftsmen in this area do with so many of the projects. And so we are right now accepting nominations through April 17th. And I know you think, oh, April 17th, it's so far away. It's not. You know how quickly this year went by. And so before we know it, April 17th will be here. So maybe that week between Christmas and New Year's, maybe it's a little bit slower and you can spend a little bit of time looking at the application. It's very simple. We ask for some supporting documentation, and we are excited about this program. Every year we do this, and we're excited to give recognition to the folks that really make things beautiful in our region. So keep that in mind. So April 17th is a very important date. And then we do have some upcoming events. We are currently working on our 2026 calendar. We do have we already have January 22nd. Our young professionals have a panel event where we're talking to young leaders about their path. It's going to be a discussion that we think will be helpful for our young professionals as they sort of grow in their careers. And then also we have the third part to this New Realities of Construction series on worksite safety. So we'll have more details about that in the beginning of the year. So enough of my talking. I would now like to introduce Pete Loftus from CLA. He is going to be our moderator today, and I will actually go off screen. And Pete, the virtual stage is all yours.
All right, thank you, Donna, and good morning, everyone. As Donna said, my name is Pete Loftus. I'm a principal at the accounting firm CLA and a longtime member of BC&E. It's a privilege to be here with you today as part of this important conversation. In just a moment, I'll introduce our outstanding panelists who bring deep expertise to today's topic. But first, let's set the stage. We all know the political environment today can feel complex and at times divisive. This session, however, is not about politics. It's about equipping ourselves with knowledge and strategies to navigate the realities of tariffs and supply chain challenges in our industry. Our goal is to foster understanding and practical discussion, not political debate. Our focus will be practical, professional, and forward-looking. We ask that all questions and comments remain focused on the business and operational aspects of this topic. So let's take the political weight off the table and center our discussion around what matters most, working together to adapt and thrive in a changing landscape. So with that, let's dive in. Tariffs and supply chain disruptions have been front and center for many of us in the construction industry. They affect everything from project timelines to cost management. Our goal today is to explore what's happening, why it matters, and what strategies can help us adapt. With that goal in mind, I'm excited to introduce our panelists who will guide us through this important topic. First up is Bill Cole. Bill is the president of both Cole Roofing and Gordian Energy Systems, LLC. Next is Daniel Hefter. Daniel is a senior estimator at Harkins Builders. And finally, we have Jerry Taylor. Jerry is vice president of sales and estimating at Baltimore Fabrication. Panelists, would you like to join me here? All right. Thank you, panelists. Welcome, and we're thrilled to have you here. To start things off, our panelists will share a bit about their background as well as provide some insights and perspectives they bring to today's topic. From there, we're aiming to spark a thoughtful and engaging conversation around the topic. Once that wraps up, I'll join back in and guide us into an interactive Q&A session. But before we get there, we want this session to reflect what matters most to you. I have a set of questions ready to keep the conversation moving, but your input is what will make this discussion more relevant and impactful. So please share your thoughts and questions in the chat, and we'll draw from them to guide this conversation. So with that, I'll step aside and hand things over to our panelists to tell us a little bit more about themselves and kick off the discussion. Bill, let's start with you.
Thanks, Pete. Bill Cole, Cole Roofing, Gordian Energy Systems. I'm a fourth generation commercial roofer and first generation commercial solar guy. In both cases, we've had our fair share of tariff questions and price changes and supply chain challenges, delays, etc. I think I am ashamed to admit it, but like in the 30 plus years I've been doing this, we've seen a lot of challenges. So I think our approach is just that whatever external complications arise, we just apply a stick-to-itiveness kind of approach to overcome those challenges and just don't accept them. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Hefter with Harkins Builders.
Yep, thanks, Bill. Appreciate everybody jumping on, and hope you guys get a lot out of this. Got to know Bill and Jerry since we all got invited to this, and looking forward to hearing from you all as well as hearing from us. So yeah, so Daniel Hefter, a senior estimator at Harkins Builders. We're a general contractor, been around for 60 years now. Here at Harkins, I work mainly in our pre-construction side of things, but I also did spend 13 months out on one of the job sites for us, so I was able to kind of get that full circle of construction. Specifically, I was invited to this from one of our vice presidents because I do track the ins and outs of the tariffs, the tariff letters, and notifications that have been coming across Harkins' desk over the last, basically this year. Can't believe the year's over already. Happy early holidays to everybody. So yeah, just kind of looking forward to kind of bringing the GC's view to this. We work at Harkins, we work hand in hand with our subcontractors, the tiers below the subcontractors, the owner's side. So, how it impacts contract and subcontracts and, hoping to kind of give a little bit of that insight. And hopefully a little bit of a breath of fresh air of what we're currently seeing from the GC side, how it may or may not be impacting our projects. And like I said, curious to hear if it's directly impacting you guys. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Jerry Taylor.
Awesome, Daniel. Appreciate it. Jerry Taylor, Vice President of Sales and Estimating with Baltimore Fabrication. Been in the steel industry for, a decade and a half at this point, which is hard to believe. Certainly in a period of uncertainty, some kudos to BC&E for putting an event like this together where we can all sit and talk and have those kind of candid conversations that are really important as we navigate this area together. I'm sure you're going to hear that term time and time again throughout this conversation. Relationships and candid communication, I think, are the most critical components of this whole piece, and building those relationships with people like Daniel, Bill, myself, other GCs, subs locally is going to be the way that we navigate through this together. So looking forward to seeing what you guys bring to the table from a question standpoint and bouncing some ideas off of the team here. I think this is going to be a great discussion. So Pete, the floor is yours. If there's an initial question you want to roll out, or if we have some Q&As already, I'm happy to go.
All right. Yes. Thank you, panelists, for sharing those insights. We appreciate the time and expertise that you bring to this discussion. We do have about 45 minutes for questions, so this is a chance to engage directly with the panelists and get answers to the challenges you're facing in your own work. I do not see any questions in the chat currently, so I will get us started with one of my own. And Bill, I'll start with you and we'll kind of go around the horn on this one. What types of contract clauses are becoming more important in this current environment?
So I think maybe even before we get to the clause per se is, having the courage to engage in open dialogue right? At the risk of like coming from the subcontractor standpoint, like I don't want to put myself at a disadvantage relative to my competition, but I'm also not I would be doing a disservice to my company if I wasn't getting out front, trying to talk to the GC about, in my mind, it's a transfer of risk discussion. So there's risk involved in everything about the building of construction and contracts. And we are fortunate to play in a very mature industry where those risks are sort of predetermined for everybody, and we kind of all know where they live. When tariff or supply chain disruption occurs, it's kind of changing the what is status quo. So we really need to come together and start talking about that, and then ultimately make a decision whether an owner, a general contractor, or the subcontractor is the one who's going to bear that risk. And then we can get to sort of finding the legal wording of how we paper that and get through a contract. Um, and again, those sort of conversations, I can think how they can be intimidating or, worrisome. But in my experience, it really does just really start to reinforce that relationship. And there are those questions that are in the back of everybody's head. So like, let's just get them out and let's talk about them. And we can find a landing spot, hopefully. And then that will probably lead to better outcomes. Um, yeah, I'm sure Dan would probably be great at giving me kind of the GC perspective on that same concept.
Yeah, Dan, same question for you on the GC side. What kind of contract clauses or just kind of dialogue and discussions need to happen as a result of this environment?
Yeah, so Bill hit on a couple of key terms that everyone's going to hear a bunch today. I think there's a few specific words that you're going to hear both Bill, Jerry, and myself all kind of mention. Risk is one of them. Communication is definitely another. And then, monitoring. So, there's the old adage that you'll see a lot in public transportation. If you see something, say something, right? So in this world, we don't want to be the last to know at the 11th hour. The owner doesn't want to be the last to know at the 11th hour. You all certainly don't want to be the last to know at the 7th hour from your suppliers. So if you're hearing rumblings or rumors of a letter coming out and what that percentage impact might be, start having the discussions. From the GC side, we've been around for 60 years. We've built our relationships with our go-to, what we'll call subcontractors and suppliers with the communicative, aspects of that. So as soon as we hear something, we'll make some phone calls and say, "Hey, are you hearing this? Are you hearing this? Is there something I should think about?" At any given point, myself personally and my teams are touching between 14 to 20 budgets, just in different variations. They could be a few months out from starting, they could be a year out from starting, they could be 3 years out from starting, and yet the owners are still calling for a budget update every 60 to 90 days. And so I'm calling Jerry, I'm calling Bill, I'm saying, "Hey, your number from 90 days ago, is it still good?" Well, at that point, that would be a nice opportunity to say, "Well, I just got this letter the other day. I don't know if it's going to impact me yet, but I want you to be aware of it." So keep in mind a couple of these key terms. The question that was stated was what type of clauses. Every contract is different. Every project is different. And in the world of construction, nothing is just black and white. It's got to have people around the table communicating. There's some legal terms that have to be agreed to by all parties, all the way up to the client, that we're signing a contract with. And we can't overprotect and over deliver from just between us and you, and then have different language with the owner. It's kind of got to be a solid trickle down and trickle up effect. For us, we've seen contracts where there's a percentage that's agreed upon by all parties. If the entire budget goes up by this much because of tariffs, are we okay with that? Should there be an owner allowance that tracks up to a certain few $100,000 across all of the trades? So maybe we get smacked by one trade, but maybe we're able to pick up with some others. So it's a communication aspect, it's a strategy, and most importantly, you got to keep the relationship aspect front and center, because people will tend to thank you for letting them know ahead of time versus finding out way too late and then having that bad taste in their mouth. Jerry, anything to add there from maybe your perspective?
Yeah, I think the piece that you touched on about establishing a benchmark and kind of sharing the responsibility of risk has been our probably biggest success factor through most of this. Being very transparent in the beginning and saying, "Hey, here's all of our CWTs that we're getting from the mills. This is an established posted price that we are buying material at today. If this job happens in 12 months, Baltimore Fabrication is willing to accept X amount of increase without impact to our initial budget, showing that you're willing to share that risk and not just point the finger upstream or really downstream in either situation, right? And being a team player, I think, goes a long way when it comes to establishing that. From like a contract clause standpoint, like you touched on, it really is relationship based. We found that the partners that we've worked with time and time again are more willing to negotiate terms and put more favorable language in because they've found that we consistently do quality work and do as you say. So as long as you're in that space and you have those partners on the GC side, I think there's a lot of power in having those radically candid conversations and trying to negotiate these things up front.
Nice. Thank you, guys. Jerry, I'm going to stay with you here because we did get a question in from the chat. So thank you, Sharon, for sending that in. So the question is, how is what is happening with the supply chain this year different or the same as what happened during and after the COVID pandemic? It doesn't seem that all supply chain issues and pricing corrected itself prior to this year. So do you want to expound on that and give your thoughts on where we are now versus where we were post-COVID?
Yeah, totally. From the steel side, I think that's 100% a accurate statement. I don't think there ever was a leveling really between COVID and now. While costs have been a bit volatile, I think the biggest constraint or bottleneck in the industry at the moment comes down to supply and demand, right? So what the domestic mills can produce to offset the overage of the burden of projects, right? And it's no surprise we're all on this call, right? The construction industry is booming. There's the data center space, AI space, chip manufacturing, all across the nation. That's really just putting a constraint on the domestic mills production. Our biggest hurdle right now is getting the rollings from the mills. There's a couple jobs out there, mainly in the Southwest region, Arizona, chip manufacturing plants that are something to the tune of 80 to 100,000 tons of steel. If those jobs are sole sourced from a new core mill, that's going to push rollings out an additional, 10 to 15 weeks. So on the structural steel side, I think there's I would say an average of 14 to 16 weeks from notice to proceed to getting steel to our shop to fabricate for a complete project. So that, gone are the days of the 20 weeks from NTP to steel on site. I don't think that exists anymore. Be curious to hear everybody's input there, but I think that's the biggest chokehold in supply chain. Really just comes down to domestic mill production capacity.
Bill, how about yourself? Do you have any thoughts on that question in terms of the supply chain and differences?
Sure. I think for us, or this just might be my typical skepticism, just generally about everything, is this because the tariff news and communication comes out sporadically and has been changing rapidly. I think that I enter most of the discussions with a bit of skepticism of like, yeah, okay, so your price is going up when and why? So I'm always leery of a little bit of like opportunistic price increasing, and it just comes back to sort of baseline rules that we all know we should do, and like get more than one quote and check with more than one vendor, and have diversity of sources. And so those are tried and true for these exact reasons. Like I think on the backside of the beginning of COVID, there was legitimate supply chain issues because you knew people weren't going to places to make stuff, right? Or we couldn't get stuff out of the ports. So it was easier for us to kind of understand and then dig in and put the effort to sort of overcome those challenges. Some of these I think are a little bit more like, well, why do you have a problem? I'm not understanding that. So again, just keep asking questions, go to those relationships, keep open dialogue. So I would say I think maybe to try and frame it in the question is like, yeah, I do think this one's different. Um, I think that it requires you to dig a little deeper, and then try and figure out what the real story is, and know that, to Dan's point earlier, like it's going to move around. It's constantly changing. Just stay ahead of it, right? And then be communicating on the other side with whoever you're putting pricing out to or whatever you're working on.
Yeah, and if I can add to that too, Pete, the one of the big differences, and that's a great question that was in the chat, but one of the big differences is that with COVID, there was a lot of uncertainty of the start and stop, like Bill's saying. Like we didn't know who was going to go to work that week and not go to work that week, which means that things just stopped. Here, things aren't stopping. We just have to do a little bit of a team effort, like Bill said, of making some additional phone calls and, maybe trying to find some more things that are domestically sourced. Maybe we just need to buy things in bulk first before something hits. Maybe as the GC, we need to offer up storage options on site or near the project site so that anyone on this call who needs to order things before a tariff letter hits, like we can do all that now, which is again why it's super important, why the communication and if we got to spend a little bit of money on one trade or another trade to keep the job moving because of storing or buying things in bulk, it's a whole lot different than a subcontractor or a GC where the entire thing shut down for a couple weeks because of COVID and something that you didn't have a lot of control. And I think that there's a lot more of the ability to control the situation here so that we all choose to dive in head first and hold hands throughout that process.
Pete, if I could just jump on that with Dan, because I
Sure.
think that was really good stuff, Dan. Like maybe that is sort of the COVID part of the conversation is that we learned all kinds of ways to overcome some of these challenges, and now we've like got them on our tool belt, and we can just go use them now. So like even things like when you can ask enough questions to realize that it's a trucking problem, not a manufacturing problem. And the product is literally sitting in Pennsylvania. Like, oh, well, why don't we just drive up and go get it? Like, we can do that. And then, like, those are sometimes you just have to, you don't even think of these sort of simpler options. But yeah, storage, buying ahead, all that stuff, they're all really good skills that we maybe refined through COVID. So that was great stuff, Dan.
Yeah, and again, I don't know if there's anybody on here from a pre-con perspective, but in pre-con, there's good old value engineering and substitutions. So everything does exist. We've just got to find people to agree to certain products, certain alternates, and we can keep this process moving. Might save some money in the meantime.
Thanks, guys. And actually, Dan, you bring up a good point about possibly some pre-construction people being on the call. If you can take a moment in the audience and you just want to put in the chat either what company you're with or what trade you belong to, so that might be helpful to kind of see the audience and who we're talking to, and maybe the panelists can kind of tailor some discussion from that way. So if you feel comfortable putting that in, please do so now, and then keep the questions coming as well. Jerry, I'll go to you. Dan mentioned buying things up front, buying in bulk. Given the volatility in pricing, do you see firms increasing either on-site or off-site storage and buying materials earlier? And if so, can you speak to kind of the logistics or the risk considerations when adopting that kind of strategy?
Yeah, I think for us, it's a little unique, right? Steel is steel. I'm not buying a specific light fixture for a specific project or a paint color, right? Something that may not be applicable somewhere else. So a lot of our material can be purchased in advance and stored. Baltimore Fabrication just opened a new shop in York, Pennsylvania, bringing in a couple extra acreages of storage, right? And I think that while it wasn't, directly from this current tariff conversation, it's something that plays a part into our ability to succeed in that environment, and having the space to buy and store under our roof essentially, without having to pay storage fees at an off-site lot or something like that. We found that bulk buying is the best way to protect ourselves and our clients. A lot of the mills will price protect larger orders, so that's a great way for us to say, hey, this job is real, it's coming in X time frame, can you hold your pricing? 9 times out of 10, you dangle a big enough carrot, the mill's gonna take that and say, yeah, that will hold that pricing. And then the next step to that is just making sure that that conversation happens upstream to Daniel and the GC team saying, hey, here's our window. We've got to go here, or we're going to be in a spot where the owner's having to pay additional money that's really not necessarily because we dragged our feet on buyout. Daniel, I'd be curious to hear your kind of side there, and because it's really easy for me to talk about my perspective and the things that I'm doing, but it's good to have both sides with the GC side. So give me a little bit of your side on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I agree with everything Jerry's saying there. I think the substitution part, the early purchasing and warehousing, like we were talking before, I think has been a huge step for us. On some projects, depending on the financing source, maybe substitutions are not allowed, right? Maybe value engineering is something that it can't be agreed to because an owner standard won't allow you to swap finishes and things like that. I think in situations like Jerry was talking about, um, having that initial phone call of what is on the table, what's not on the table, and then also digging deep in with our trade partners and understanding from them, what are we not thinking about, right? We try to capture everything from the GC, the pre-con perspective. We have, other projects we're touching that we can use lessons learned from, but kind of doing a little bit more of a deep dive and asking you all to do a deep dive to kind of help move this forward. I think one of the other things too is I don't think anybody's asking for quote unquote proof all the time, but it is helpful to have like the email forwarded from a supplier or a written quote that you just got that's going to make your number go up. That you can just say, look, this is why my number went up. I'm literally just passing information through. So yeah, like I said in the beginning, communication, ongoing monitoring of the situation, and trying to mitigate as well as best we can as a team.
Yeah,
Bill, I assume you have a material intensive business there in the roofing industry. Have you changed your strategy in terms of storage or buying product earlier?
I don't know that we've changed it. I think we've been fortunate to have storage and use it. Like we don't really want a double and triple handle product, but yeah, one of our strategies forever, independent of tariffs or supply chain, is like there are price increases that happen throughout the course of a year. Most of our products are, oil asphaltic based products, and that stuff moves around. So, um, being able to buy ahead, have those conversations, am I able to pass that through? What's the storage requirements look like? Get the insurance set up, like and just do store materials in the contracts. That's a great mechanism for all of us to remove risk right away. So yeah, I mean we do that as just probably standard operating procedure regardless of, more intense problems, I guess.
Okay. All right. We have a great question in the chat here from Linda. So Jerry, I guess I'll start with you. And again, we'll just go around on this one. So the question is, many of the current tariffs are being challenged in the Supreme Court. If the court rules that many tariffs are invalid and cannot be imposed, what impact will that have on your projects in your companies?
Awesome question. And to be direct and straightforward, I don't think it'll be much outside of supply chain, right? So Steel Fab Baltimore Fab has always been partnering with domestic mills. So we're not buying steel offshores. It's kind of rare to see that on the East Coast, maybe a touch on the West Coast. If the tariffs do go away, I think the initial response, certainly from the mill side, goes back to supply and demand. So hopefully there'd be a little bit of lightening on the burden that the new cores of the world are seeing, to where we can decrease some of our initial durations. We can get steel in our shops quicker, help these GCs that are selling schedule, hold those schedules, and be more of a team player. From a cost standpoint, I think a lot of the domestic price fluctuation that we're seeing is kind of what Bill alluded to earlier with how much can we take, right? Like we know that the offshore mills are charging a little bit more, so hey, we're going to charge a little bit more. We're getting a little bit busier, we're going to charge a little bit more. So I don't know if that necessarily would change as demand lightened, but obviously that could be a factor, but I don't have a crystal ball to answer that one completely.
Yeah, Jerry mentioned one of my favorite terms in construction, the crystal ball. We get asked that a lot, especially from the GC side of, so what do you think this job's going to cost 3 years from now? Okay, well, we'll go into our crystal ball, right? To answer that question directly from the chat, just speaking from current perspective, and this is a transparent call where we do want to share information. I see there's some other GCs in the chat here as well too, and maybe are nodding along virtually, but you know supply and demand is a real thing for also just the current state of all of the projects out there. There's different divisions that I'm in charge of, specifically market rate, affordable, their government. There are certain divisions that are kind of just continuing to roll along, and then there's ones like specifically market rate where there's a lot of privately financed deals that have been on the shelf for well over a year, maybe longer. They're all kind of sitting back, tracking the interest rates to drop. And when the interest rates drop, did it drop enough? And so there's also just a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of phone calls I'm having with guys like Jerry and Bill and their teams. Hey, what's your Q1 look like? What's your Q2 look like? If they've got availability and they're also staring at a tariff letter that just came in, and they're thinking about making that tariff increase their budget, but also they might not get the job. We're having those conversations as well, which is, a 15-20% tariff letter in the big picture may only have a few percentage points in the overall budget. Some of those is a Harkin strategy or another GC strategy that we'll go ahead and eat that to use the right contractor on that project. Or we can't. In order for this job to move forward, we've got to work together during the buyout and award process to figure out how to get through that letter. As far as the Supreme Court and all that, I wish I had well, I don't know if I wish, but anybody wishes they have a crystal ball about what goes on in the Supreme Court all the time. But for whatever it is that they end up deciding, projects that are cooked, projects that are signed, contracts that are signed, that's kind of in the past. We got to move forward. The ones that are in the discussions right now are the ones you want to have your antenna up for, and again, continue to have that communication of, I had this premium before for my contract. If the tariffs go away, is that premium on the table now as a deduct? If that value is not the same, we're going to ask why that value is not the same. If it was, $100,000 ad before from Jerry, well, 2 weeks from now that tariff gets yanked. Do we get that 200,000 back? Does the owner get the back? So, kind of having those conversations, and everyone in the business wants to make sure it's a successful project, make money, make profit, but we also have to be realistic that you also need work. We also need work. We've got to get these jobs to keep rolling along. So sometimes all of us, including the GC, have to take a little bit of a hit to get the job to move forward, and we kind of all work together to take a hit so that in the times that are good, we can all be smiling on the other end of that as well.
Yeah, I would just reinforce that. That's good stuff, Dan. Like, a lot of it is, there's a lot of variables in construction. There's a lot of things that we're trying to get right. Some of them have outsized impacts to the profitability of projects. Others, like there are not enough hours in the day to micromanage every single aspect. So you have to make decisions about how you're going to spend your time. And if you can do some math ahead of time to realize whether there's enough juice to justify the squeeze on some sort of reversal of a tariff, and you want to go fight with other like contractors who bought at a higher price from a vendor that you basically agreed to buy it and at the price, like I that seems like I don't have time to do that. I think I'd rather talk with Dan and Jerry and we come up with ways to accelerate the project or find some value engineering or, just run a really great team-oriented project that makes us all, a little more profitable. There's probably other things like sometimes, we just got to pick the right battle to have, I guess, is where I'm going with that.
All right, thanks, guys. Of course, the biggest impact, if it really makes these tariffs go away, is that no one will watch the recording of this webinar. So we got that. We do have another question in the chat, and Daniel, this one's directed at you. You talked about pre-construction. Are you able to provide information on availability of equipment and materials to designers and engineers during the design phase of a project that would reduce risk on the construction cost or schedule and make it easier for everyone?
Yeah, absolutely, and great question there, and is hopefully something that is part of every GC's pre-con process is our job when we see the first spec narrative, right, before we even get the spec book, is to go through the list of manufacturers there, the basis of design products, and provide feedback. If we're starting to hear from Carrier or Goodman or one of those HVAC players that on all of our projects that one manufacturer is causing budgets to go up, it's our project, it's our role to bring that up during these design meetings to make everyone aware that if this remains the basis of design, you may have a more premium HVAC number. For example, what happens with electrical, things like that. So that's just going through the spec and seeing a manufacturer that jumps out. But the other level of the pre-con that is important um, is to make sure that lead times are discussed. Back during COVID, which kind of ties that other question from earlier, everyone was asking, what's the lead time for things? What's the lead time for things? Switchgear was always a big one, because you had to plan a project around when you thought you were getting switchgear, cabinets, things like that, products like that. So while the manufacturer level of this discussion may be okay, because that basis of design, we haven't seen any premiums, it may be a domestic item, et cetera. The next level down is, well, what's the lead time on that? So that, we don't have something specified that while it'll work in budget is not going to work in schedule. And we've got to also make those phone calls to our suppliers, or ask Bill and Jerry and everybody else to make those calls to your suppliers. What are you hearing? Like, okay, your number's in budget. I think we can use you on this job, but is there something that we should know about that's going to push the job a month or two, or we don't know, but it might? I think those types of conversations are very healthy to have, again, as early as possible. Great question there.
Great, thanks. Jerry, you're in the estimating department, so let's go this one to you. How are contractors adjusting estimating practices to account for price volatility?
So we've kind of established a data warehouse on our end that tracks live pricing over time. So we're not going off of historical numbers. Everything that we're bidding is cost at the time of bid. And that comes from relationships, right? So we have a great relationship with the mills that we work with. We get posted increases maybe ahead of the public schedule, to where I can make those adjustments a week or two before we know that they're coming. I think anybody who's kind of doing unit rate estimating is at pretty high risk in these types of periods where you're not able to maybe manipulate your material costs. I think that could be a big red flag. And then just communication, talking with your team. We have a really good open dialogue here on our floor where it's collaborative, right? If I'm seeing something that one of my guys aren't seeing, it's my responsibility to step up and say, hey, let's make sure we're making these changes, vetting everything and making sure that the team is protected collectively. And I mean team is in our sense and the GC side.
Great. Bill, how about you? Are you making any adjustments to estimating practices?
I don't know that. So I think one of the differentiators is if we think about where your company is sort of in the, I don't know that I have vocabulary for this, but like Jerry is buying commodity-based products coming out of a mill. My stuff is like refined 3 or 4 times, right? And then shipped to me. So like price increase for me is coming out way farther in advance. It's also debatable whether it actually holds, right? Because it's competitive and it's got margin in it. And if the manufacturers are trying to buy market share, that all of a sudden that price increase never really materializes. So for us, we're always engaging in, hey, here's what the project looks like. Here's kind of what my purchase would look like. Am I able to stack that up with a couple other jobs that I might already have that might land in the same time frame, which we talked earlier about bulk buying and things of that nature. So from an estimating standpoint, our expectations is that we are engaging with multiple manufacturers, getting up-to-date numbers, quantifying whether there's anticipated price increases, 2 quarters from now, a year from now, or whenever the project is actually going to need the roofing products. So there's a little bit of difference, and I think if we choose to be more sophisticated about it in that way, like the conversations that Dan and Jerry should have can be different than the conversations that Dan and I would have about what are realistic price increases, what's kind of maybe fluff, and we elect to collectively gamble on something or push back on something or go to the owner for an allowance on something because we don't really know if it's real and it's so far away. Um, so I think that's maybe there's some nuances in what the product is that you're most concerned about and how it gets bought and manufactured.
Okay.
Yeah, and to add to that too, from a budgeting perspective, a lot of this tariff discussion is very much parallel to the escalation clause discussion that happened during COVID, where I'd get a proposal that says, my number is good for a week, my number is good until the end of the month, and then there was little language at the bottom that said add 20% if it's past whatever, right? And so all we would do from our pre-con side is go, okay, that's great information, but we're not going to just load that possible percentage on everybody's numbers and blow the whole budget and then just say, owner, this is what, yeah. So there's a strategy there from pre-con side too, where keep that kind of information below the line, or if it's in the line, what's a rough order of magnitude of what you think? Because at the end of the day, I could have Jerry and 4 other steel numbers. I could have Bill and 6 other roofing numbers. And I can't tell if the guy that's all the way in left field in either direction has or doesn't have escalation costs in there because they're not communicating it. You might not win a job if you're way out in left field because you carried a tariff cost that'll hit 6 months from now. Well, thank you for pointing that out, but I don't know that. So if you're a 500,000 off from everybody else, unfortunately, that's not a competitive range for me. And so, keeping in mind from a clause perspective, Pete, from earlier in this discussion, the tariff clause is important to us from a pre-con budgeting standpoint. It's going to be important to the contract standpoint with the owner. And again, if the Supreme Court or something just kind of cuts all of it out, we don't want to have to dig through all of the base bid numbers. You don't want to have to go through all your base bid numbers that came from suppliers and try and yank all that stuff out. So general rule of thumb, if you're just carrying 5% to get through tariffs, okay, let us know that so we can then make sure that that 5% is applied to your competitors on bid day or pulled from yours because your competitors don't have that. Now all of a sudden you went from not competitive to competitive.
Got it.
I
So,
just
go ahead,
also
Phil.
want to make note that there's only 4 people in Jerry's market, but Dan picked 6 roofers for me to compete against. So that's just
So, Dan, we talked about the contract clauses and a lot about upfront communication and open dialogue. How are owners responding to these conversations and these requests for more flexible terms?
Yeah, so I think our long-term clients have that comfortability with Harkins. Clients that we've been working with through all the ups and downs over the decades know that we've got a system in place that works, that they can trust, that we're transparent about. The newer clients who don't maybe really know us are digging into the weeds, as they should. They want to know what our process is. They want to know how we got through COVID. They want to know how we got through, the market swings that happened, years ago. And I think that, just speaking from a general perspective here again, they want to be brought to the table as information is available. Nobody wants to be the last to know, and sometimes being the first to know isn't that, it's great, but it may not, it may be too early, right? We live in a world now where you can tweet something and then 5 minutes later you retract that tweet because it wasn't accurate, and we see that all the time. Now we're in a world of AI. Someone can just Google, what's the current tariff impact on my job? You're not going to get good information that way. So having that picking up the phone relationship with the clients goes a long way, Pete. And I'm sure, Jerry and Bill, you guys have that too. I mean, there are going to be guys that call you that you will go to in a pinch if you need a number. And you're going to trust that number and you're going to know it's good and they're going to hold it. Same thing, or if I had to call, Bill and Jerry for a similar conversation, and at the GC level, we want to be that to the owner in times of uncertainty, if we want to call it that. We want owners to know they can call Harkins and they know that that number that we worked on for the last year and a half in pre-con is going to hold. And there's going to be minimal, if any, change order process. And if there is any change orders, it's due to the things we already tracked. It's due to the things that we already were aware of and we've already been open about. And ultimately, it's a very much collaborative team environment where the titles shouldn't matter. You know, the president CEO of our client that we're working with, and I'm a senior estimator, but if I have a estimator who just got out of college that, you know, found something through something and brought it to the table, we're all the same level, we're all the same team, we're all trying to get to the same goal. And you know, the more that you're able to get that relationship strengthened through times like this, you're going to continue to get on that short list of invites for the more difficult projects, the larger projects, the more challenging, you know, aspects of the industry moving forward.
Got it. Um, Bill, I'm going to go to you on this one, but I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball here because we had a question come in that kind of relates to that. So if you want to speak to how owners are responding, that's great. But the question is, are you seeing any differences depending on the type of owner, specifically government contracts and bids as opposed to privately owned projects? So I don't know if you can speak to that, but that's the question from the chat.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we have had, just generally speaking, positive discussions. Like, in today's universe, it's pretty hard to like hide under a rock and not know what's going on. So most people that you would engage with from the owner side know that this is again, a risk for their project. If you approach it from the standpoint of like, let's just quantify the risk and then decide who wants to take it, that's a pretty straightforward approach. In the public space, that's sometimes a lot more difficult. But I don't believe, even though we may have gotten a response like first round that's like, nope, we can't do that. I think if you keep pressing a little bit more, you might find out that that's not always the case. That, depending on how consequential the risk is, right? There are ways. I think, and this is again not a secret that no one knows. So if it's a customer that I've built trust with and have done stuff with in the past, boy, those conversations tend to go a lot better and easier than if it's a new person, right? That we don't have a track record with. So those are the kinds of things that independent of tariff and supply chain or any of that, like when you're talking to your people, it's like we don't know what curveball or challenges ahead of us down the road. So let's make sure we're always taking care of our customers, the way we should. Because one day we're going to have to pick the phone up and say, "Hey, we have this challenge. Let's come together and try and solve it." Um, so I would encourage always pick up the phone and ask the question to any owner under any circumstance. Like it's a real challenge, it's a real problem, it's a real issue, whatever it looks like. The worst thing you can get is a no thank you, and you move on to try and find another way to solve it. But I think you'd be pleasantly surprised at how well it is received that you are sharing communication, sharing information with them. They're more informed and understand the challenges. And most people will lean in and try and help you find a good way to solve it.
Yeah, I mean, Baltimore Fab doesn't do a ton of government work, so I'm going to lean on Daniel here in a second to kind of help me fill in the gaps there if he's got some experience in that space. But 80 to 90% of our work at the moment is in the mission critical data center side of things, and that's just such a bullish market that it really is all about relationships. And I know I've said that 10, 15 times, but getting ahead of these conversations and having those one-on-ones with ownership. I mean, to the point where Steel Fab is sometimes on these data center projects before a general contractor is selected, because they're having these really transparent conversations about, hey, these are the dates that you guys want to hit. We need to go at X time frame. And it's not being used as like a leveraging tool, right? It's valid. It's not something that we're doing just to push sales. And we found that that's just had a lot of success. But to the government side of stuff, Daniel, I'd be curious because we've had limited success getting more favorable language included when we're talking about federal work.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And one thing I wanted to touch while Bill was kicking us off is, you know, a lot of the government work that we do or we chase is design, bid, build. So, you know, they expect that the number that you go in with, that's your number. And so that, kind of ties back to that crystal ball discussion, right? So I work on a few government jobs, but we have a whole government division. So those guys I would lean on more specifically. But from the conversation, just by sitting next to them, if they submit a number on bid day and we're selected as a GC, that's the number. There would have to be something astronomically substantial for our team to have not already gotten ahead of what could be, to be able to hold that number. I haven't seen that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen from other GCs and other government projects for sure. But I think this question was specific to government, but that also mentioned other financing, other owners with different financing sources. We do a lot of state-funded projects as well, or HUD projects, that those different groups have, certain thresholds that they can or can't, exceed, different buckets they can or can't dip into. Sometimes it could be the difference of a job moving forward or not, when something like this happens, and we have to try again, there's the word again, mitigate, to make sure that the project moves forward. So yeah, I mean, ultimately for us, I jotted down here, Pete. I'm sure you'll get to it, but really, of all the tariff conversation over the last 6 to 8 months, let's say, for us from the GC side, there's really only been three that have kind of made our ears kind of perk up a little bit because we've actually seen something happen because of it from a financial perspective. Steel was the big one. Of course, Jerry knows that. That's probably one of the reasons why he's on here, of course. Cabinets and recently elevators. And one example that I just kind of want to bring up is it doesn't mean that we're not seeing it from anyone else. There are other letters that have been out. But of the ones that we've seen incremental, impacts to budget, those are kind of those, right? So on a most recent project of mine, the cabinet one, for example, was one where they had a letter that it was going to be a certain percentage that it was going to impact their scope. They ran their numbers, they gave us a new number. It ultimately ended up being less than a 5% impact on the entire trade of cabinets on a 60 to 70 million dollar deal. So it wasn't going to kill the deal. It was just good information that we had, because if it was going to be that information consistently through all 16 divisions, okay, we might need to track that differently. We might need to communicate that differently. But just being realistic and transparent about what we're seeing in today's market, there may be other trades, roofing, Bill, you might have had tariff letters and stuff, but each company is making a business decision as these letters are coming through, which may or may not be driven by their current bandwidth and schedule and availability of projects. It may also just mean they have to switch from their go-to guy to their number two guy because the number two guy isn't going to charge them that. So, we just ask that you don't just forward an email you get or just blindly report what you're hearing, right? Do a little digging first. Is there any way that you can make that go away or make that be incorporated into a competitive number for yourself first? While also, again, making sure that it's front and center, that you are hearing this and you're working on it. And that'll go a long way when I sit down with my project managers and say, I am most confident in Baltimore Fab. I'm most confident in Bill's company. I'm most confident with these guys. And look at all of this, backlog of information that they've done to try and get us to this number that no one else did. And I think that this is a big reason why we should go with them and award them this project.
You touched
All right.
on something there, Daniel, that I want to expand on a little bit. It comes back to the kind of overall project impact relative to these tariffs. Speaking to steel specifically, right? We've seen an average increase across all profiles of $13.26 CWT, which is cost per 100 pounds of material. So if you were to take call it a 500-ton structural project, it's $120,000 to $130,000 of cost increase on a $3.5 million project. So by the time you factor in labor dilutions and things of that nature, these impacts are really, I would say, within tolerance, right? It's not, if you're getting pricing from people that's 20, 30, 40%, to me, that's a red flag that somebody's trying to take advantage of the current situation and not being forthright and honest with you as a purchaser. So I don't think the intention of this call is to scare anybody away. It's to lay those kind of baseline understandings of what these impacts actually look like. And when you peel back the layers of the onion, it's really not as scary as maybe it sounds in the beginning.
Yeah, it's really well said and great point there, Jerry.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think so, minimal impact And on top of it, if you just understand the contractual relationship that you're entering, where that risk should lay, then you can determine, is this a minimal impact that I'm willing to take, that's the risk that I'm going to take? Or am I entering into your point, like a design build contract where I know already ahead of time I'm taking this risk, but am I willing to do it? So really you're kind of not freaking out, as Jerry told us, like let's relax. And then if we understand the rules of the game, then we can make, informed decisions as to what risk we're really willing to take and how much of a gamble it really is.
Yeah, and just like Jerry was breaking down before for that $13 example, during COVID, we had, wood frame projects where the cost per square foot of wood framing would go up 25 cents, 50 cents, 75 cents on 300,000 square foot of wood. Those are some big eye-opening, eyebrow-raising discussions that need to have had. And in COVID, they were going up $10 to $15 a square foot. And that was things that we really needed to focus and hone in on. And to Jerry's point, if steel's going to go up 100,000 for him, and for Cole Roofing, it's going to go up 50,000 for him. And if those are true costs that they did everything they could, they really tried to mitigate it, and this is the lowest and best they can do in order to still get this project, and it's consistent with what we're seeing with the competition, we're going to go ahead and add all those numbers up so we can have a conversation generally with the owner. It's no different when certain financing sources are requiring other, programs that will add wage scale, like certain wage scale jobs. We get asked from the owner, if I add wage scale to the job, how much is my number going to go? So we kind of generally want to have an idea, but that all stems from the information we get from you all, so to try and give us your best number when the worst thing happens. And it might still be okay that we have to raise your number up, but it's a global discussion we have to have with the owner that we're not going to just hone in on every 10 grand amount. It's just generally we're going to add it all together and understand how big of an impact it is. Or to Jerry's point, it may be within tolerance, like he said, for a GC. We might say on the $80 million deal, the within tolerance could be 150 grand, 200 grand, could be 400 grand. It just depends on a lot of different factors. Again, business decision, relationships with the clients, relationship with the subcontractors, getting a subcontractor in early too, and saying, hey, like, I just got this set of documents. It's not going to be bid out for another year, but I want you to kind of be under my wing because I know you'll be able to handle any tariff issue that comes up. And, maybe we've tried to mitigate this throughout each budget iteration. And now you're also a front runner to get the job because you've been working on it. So it goes a long way to continue to communicate with the GC and vice versa, us back to you guys too.
All right, thank you, Daniel. That's a great point, and I think a good message to end on as we're right at about time. So as we wrap up, I want to extend my sincere thanks to our panelists for sharing their insights and expertise. Thank you, guys. Great job. I want to thank the audience. Thank you for being here and making this conversation meaningful. Your participation is what makes this community thrive. And finally, I want to thank BC&E for allowing me the honor to moderate this discussion. Tariffs and supply chain changes aren't going away overnight, but staying informed and working together positions us to overcome these challenges successfully. So thank you all again and happy holidays. Take care.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, everyone. Take
Thanks,
care.
everybody.
Thank you.